She does not need you pretending to be her father anymore. Those words were spoken quietly, but they changed the way I saw my entire life. I remember standing in my kitchen that evening, holding a coffee cup in my hand, listening to my wife explain that her daughter needed her real father. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there and wondered how a person could spend 10 years loving a child, protecting her, and being there for every important moment, yet still feel like a temporary guest in his own family. My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my adult life, I believe that love was proven through actions. I never expected a title. I never needed anyone to call me a hero. When I married Emily, I knew her daughter, Lily, was part of the package. I knew there would be challenges. I knew I would never replace the man who gave her life. I respected that. But what I hoped for was the chance to become someone important in her world. When Lily was 8 years old, she was a shy little girl who often stayed quiet around new people. I remember the first time she asked me for help with a school project. It was something simple, just a cardboard model she had to build for class. But I remember how proud she looked when she showed me the finished project. That small moment stayed with me because I realized I was no longer just Emily's husband. I was becoming someone Lily trusted. Over the years, I became the person who packed lunches before school, attended parent meetings, helped with homework, and showed up at events even when my schedule was busy. I was there for the ordinary moments that nobody takes pictures of. The early mornings, the late-night conversations, the small victories. Those were the moments that built our relationship. I never thought about the fact that I was her stepfather. In my heart, I was simply her dad in the ways that mattered. But over time, I noticed small changes in Emily. They were not dramatic. They were subtle. She started talking more about Lily reconnecting with her biological father. At first, I understood. I knew every child has questions about where they come from. I believed Lily deserved to know her own story. I never wanted to stand in the way of that. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like my place in the family was becoming smaller. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself that love was not about recognition. Love was about giving without expecting anything in return. But there is a difference between not expecting praise and feeling invisible. That difference became impossible to ignore on that evening when Emily looked at me and said those words. She was not trying to be cruel. I could see that she believed she was doing what was best for Lily. She believed a connection with her biological father was something her daughter needed. But in that moment, I felt something inside me change. I realized that I had spent years trying to prove I belonged somewhere I had already given my heart to. After dinner, I went into my home office and sat quietly at my desk. I looked at the photographs around the room. Pictures of family vacations, birthday celebrations, moments that represented a decade of memories. I did not question whether those memories were real. They were real. I knew the love I gave was real. But I also had to ask myself a difficult question. What happens when the people you love no longer see the role you have played in their lives? The next morning, I received an email from my company. It was an opportunity one had been offered before, but never seriously considered. A major project in France needed someone with my experience, and the company was willing to provide a long-term transfer to Paris. For years, I had turned down opportunities that required me to leave because family always came first. But this time, I looked at the message differently. Maybe leaving was not about walking away from my family. Maybe it was about finding out who I was when I was no longer trying so hard to prove my place in theirs. I read the email again and again. Then I made a decision that surprised even me. I accepted the transfer. I did not announce it with anger. I did not use it to punish anyone. I simply signed the documents and started preparing for a new chapter of my life. I had spent years being there for everyone else. Now, for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to choose myself. After I accepted the transfer to France, I did not immediately tell Emily or Lily. I needed time to process the decision myself before I explained it to anyone else. It was not a choice I made because I stopped caring about my family. In fact, that was the hardest part. I cared so much that I had spent years putting my own dreams aside. Every major decision I made was based on what was best for them. But after hearing those words from Emily, I started asking myself a question I had avoided for a long time. Who was Daniel Carter when he was not needed by everyone else? The answer was not easy to find. For 10 years, my identity had been connected to being a husband and a father figure. I was proud of that. I never saw it as a burden. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was also an individual with my own goals, dreams, and future. The transfer opportunity had always been there. Paris was not just another assignment. It was a chance to lead a major international project and work with people from different parts of the world. Before that night, I always found a reason to say no. I told myself that the timing was never right. I told myself that family needed me more. But now I wondered if staying had become less about love and more about fear. I wondered if I was afraid to discover whether my presence truly mattered. A few days later, I finally told Emily. We were sitting at the kitchen table where so many important conversations had happened over the years. She looked surprised when I explained that I had accepted the position in Paris. She asked me if I was serious. I told her I was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I think she expected me to argue about what she said. Maybe she expected me to tell her how much it hurt or ask her to reconsider. But I did not. I simply explained that I believed it was time for me to experience something different. Emily asked how long I had been considering it. I told her the truth. The opportunity had existed before, but I had always chosen to stay. I had chosen family every time. She looked down at the table, and I could see that she was beginning to understand the weight of that decision. I did not want her to feel guilty. That was never my goal. I did not want to make her regret having feelings about Lily's biological father. I understood that a child's connection to their past could be meaningful, but I also wanted her to understand something important. A person can respect another person's place in a child's life without erasing their own contribution. Being a stepfather does not mean being temporary. It does not mean the love you give matters less. Later that evening, Lily came to talk to me. She had heard about the transfer. She sat beside me and asked if I was leaving because of something she did. That question was one of the hardest things I had ever heard. I immediately told her no. I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her that she was one of the greatest blessings in my life and that nothing would change that. I explained that sometimes adults make decisions because they need to grow too. She looked confused. She was old enough to understand that something had changed, but young enough to wonder if she was somehow responsible. I told her that family was not measured by distance. I told her that being far away did not mean I would stop caring. But deep down, I knew this move was also about something I needed to learn. I needed to know whether my place in their lives existed because I was always available or because I was truly valued. The weeks before my departure were filled with mixed emotions. There were moments when I wanted to cancel everything and return to the familiar life I knew. There were moments when I looked around the house and remembered every memory created there. But each time I thought about changing my decision, I remembered something. Leaving was not an act of anger. It was not a punishment. It was simply a step toward discovering a part of myself I had ignored for too long. On my final night before leaving America, I walked through the house quietly. I looked at the family pictures on the walls and smiled. Those memories were still mine. Nothing could erase them. But tomorrow, I would board a plane and begin a new chapter. For the first time in years, I was not leaving because someone needed me somewhere else. I was leaving because I needed to remember who I was. The morning I left for France was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic goodbye. There were no angry words or emotional speeches. Just a simple morning filled with the kind of silence that happens when people know something important is changing. I packed my final suitcase, checked my passport one last time, and looked around the house that had been my home for so many years. Every room held a memory. The kitchen where I made breakfast before school. The living room where we watched movies together. The hallway where Lily used to leave her backpack after coming home. It was strange how a place could feel both familiar and completely different at the same time. Emily drove me to the airport. For most of the trip, neither of us said much. I think we were both trying to find the right words, but some moments are too complicated for simple sentences. When we arrived, Emily looked at me and said she hoped I understood that she never wanted me to feel unimportant. I believe she meant it. I knew Emily was not trying to remove me from Lily's life. She was trying to make sense of her daughter's connection to her biological father. But I also knew that intentions and consequences are not always the same. Someone can have a good reason for saying something and still create pain with those words. Before I walked toward my gate, I turned to Emily and told her something I had been thinking about. I said, I hope Lily gets everything she needs in life. I always have. I just hope she remembers that the person who shows up every day matters too. Emily did not answer immediately. She simply nodded. Then I hugged her and said goodbye. As the plane took off, I watched the city become smaller beneath me. I thought about everything I was leaving behind. My home, my routine, the people I loved. But I also felt something I had not felt in a long time. A sense of possibility. Arriving in Paris was overwhelming at first. Everything was different. The language, the streets, the pace of life. Even simple things like ordering food or finding my way around the city required patience. For years, I had been comfortable in my role as a husband and father figure. Now I was just Daniel again, a person starting a new chapter. The first few weeks were challenging, but they were also refreshing. My work required focus, and I found myself enjoying the feeling of solving problems and building something new. I met people from different backgrounds who had completely different experiences from mine. They did not know my history. They did not know about the painful conversation with Emily. They did not know I was the man who had spent years wondering if he truly belonged. To them, I was simply Daniel, a professional with skills and experience. That was something I had forgotten. My value did not disappear just because someone failed to recognize it. One evening, I received a video call from Lily. At first, I was surprised. She usually waited for me to contact her. Seeing her face on the screen reminded me how much I missed her. She asked about France, my apartment, and my new job. Then she became quiet. After a moment, she said she wanted to tell me something. She said she had been thinking about what I told her before I left. She said she understood that I was not leaving because of her. But she also admitted that she had started noticing all the things I used to do. The small things she never paid attention to before. The rides to school. The advice before important moments. The way I always made time for her. Hearing that was emotional, but I did not want her to feel guilty. I told her that love was not something she had to repay. I did not do those things because I wanted recognition. I did them because I cared about her. She smiled and said she knew that now. After the call ended, I sat by my window overlooking the streets of Paris and thought about how strange life can be. Sometimes people only understand the importance of something when they experience its absence. But I did not want my absence to be a lesson through sadness. I wanted it to be an opportunity for everyone, including myself, to understand what truly mattered. I came to France thinking I was leaving my family behind, but maybe I was discovering a healthier way to love them, a way that did not require me to disappear inside the needs of others. Living in France changed me in ways I never expected. When I first arrived, I thought the hardest part would be adjusting to a new country. I thought the challenge would be learning a different routine, understanding a different culture, and building a life far away from everything familiar. But the biggest challenge was something much deeper. It was learning how to separate my value from the role I had spent so many years carrying. For a long time, I measured my importance by how much I could do for others. If someone needed help, I was there. If someone had a problem, I tried to solve it. If my family needed support, I put my own plans aside. I never regretted loving them. But in France, I started discovering that a person can give everything to others and still need time to understand themselves. My days became different. I focused on my work, explored the city, and slowly created a new routine. I walked through streets filled with history, visited small cafes, and learned to appreciate quiet moments that I had ignored before. Back home, my life had always been moving from one responsibility to another. In Paris, I finally had time to think. I thought about my relationship with Emily. I thought about Lily. I thought about the night when everything changed. The more I reflected, the more I realized that the pain was not only about what Emily said. The deeper pain came from the fear that maybe my love had been invisible. Maybe all those years of showing up had become something people expected instead of something they appreciated. A few months earlier, I would have blamed myself for feeling that way. I would have told myself that a good husband and father figure should never think about his own needs. But I was beginning to understand that healthy love does not require someone to disappear completely. While I was building my new life in France, things at home were changing too. Emily and Lily continued their daily routine, but they started noticing the empty spaces I had left behind. It was not just about practical things. It was about the little moments that had become part of their lives. Emily once told me during a phone call that she had never realized how many small things I handled without mentioning them. She said the house felt different, not because anything was wrong, but because someone important was missing. I listened quietly. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so." But that was not who I wanted to become. I did not leave America to prove a point. I did not want anyone to feel guilty. I wanted understanding, not regret. A few weeks later, Lily called me after school. She told me about a project she was working on and asked for my opinion. It was a simple conversation, but it meant a lot to me. Before, I would have been focused on being present in every possible way. Now, I realized that even from thousands of miles away, I could still be part of her life. Our relationship was changing, but it was not disappearing. During that conversation, Lily asked me something unexpected. She asked if I ever felt like I was not her real father. I stayed quiet for a moment because I wanted to answer honestly. I told her that family is complicated. I told her that biology is one part of a person's story, but love and commitment are also powerful parts. I explained that I never wanted to replace anyone. I only wanted to be someone she could count on. She told me she understood that now. Those words stayed with me after we ended the call. Not because they erased the hurt, but because they showed me that people can grow. Sometimes understanding comes slowly. Sometimes people need distance to see what was always in front of them. That night, I looked out at the lights of Paris and thought about the journey I had taken. I left because I felt forgotten. But maybe this chapter was teaching all of us something important. Love should never be measured only by who has a title or who shares a last name. Sometimes the people who choose to stay day after day are the ones who quietly become the most important parts of our lives. The longer I stayed in France, the more I understood that distance has a way of revealing things people often ignore when they are too close. When I was living in America, I was surrounded by responsibilities every day. I was so focused on being dependable that I rarely stopped to ask myself if I felt appreciated. I believed that if I loved people enough, everything else would naturally fall into place. But being away gave me a different perspective. I began to understand that love is not only about giving. It is also about being seen, being respected, and knowing that your presence matters. My life in Paris continued to develop. The project at work was going well, and I found myself gaining confidence again. I was meeting expectations professionally, but more importantly, I was reconnecting with parts of myself I had forgotten. I started cooking again, something I used to enjoy before my schedule became filled with everyone else's needs. I explored different neighborhoods on weekends and learned to appreciate simple moments. For the first time in years, I was not rushing from one responsibility to another. I was allowing myself to exist without constantly asking what someone else needed from me. During one phone call with Emily, she mentioned something that caught my attention. She said Lily had started asking more questions about the past. She wanted to understand more about the years before she became a teenager and the people who had been there for her. Emily said Lily had been looking through old photos and remembering moments I had almost forgotten. Hearing that was emotional. I realized that children often notice more than adults think they do. Even when they do not have the words to explain it, they remember who made them feel safe. They remember who showed up. They remember who celebrated their achievements and comforted them during difficult days. I never wanted Lily to feel like she had to choose between people. That was never my intention. I always respected that her biological father was part of her story. I only hoped she would understand that my story with her mattered too. A few days later, Lily called me again. This time, our conversation felt different. She was more open. She told me about school, her friends, and the things she had been thinking about. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said, "I did not realize how much you did until you were not there." Those words were simple, but they carried a lot of meaning. I told her that sometimes people do not notice the little things until those things change. But I also told her that I was not upset with her. She was growing up and learning how complicated relationships could be. I wanted her to understand that love should never come with pressure or guilt. After that conversation, I received a message from Emily. She said she wanted to talk honestly about everything that happened before I left. When we finally spoke, she admitted that she had been thinking about her words for months. She said she never intended to make me feel like I was replaceable. She explained that she had been focused on Lily's connection with her biological father and failed to recognize the impact her words had on me. I listened carefully. Part of me had waited a long time to hear those words. But another part of me understood that an apology does not erase the past. It simply creates an opportunity to move forward. I told Emily that the hardest part was not hearing that Lily needed her biological father. I understood that. The hardest part was feeling like everything I had done for our family could be dismissed because I was not connected by blood. Emily became quiet. Then she said something I had hoped to hear for a long time. She said she finally understood that being a father figure is not about biology. It is about commitment, patience, and love. That conversation did not fix everything immediately. Relationships do not heal because of one phone call. They heal through consistent actions and genuine effort. But it was the beginning of something different. For the first time since I arrived in France, I felt like Emily was not just hearing my words. She was understanding them. I looked around my apartment that evening and realized something important. Leaving had not destroyed my family. It had forced all of us to see things more clearly. Sometimes people need space before they understand the value of what was always beside them. And sometimes the person who walks away quietly is not abandoning a family. Sometimes they are giving everyone a chance to truly understand what they had. After the conversation with Emily, I expected to feel completely relieved, but the truth was more complicated. Forgiveness does not happen in one moment. Understanding does not erase years of emotions that have been quietly building inside a person. I appreciated that Emily finally saw my perspective, but I also knew that rebuilding trust would require more than words. It would require patience, honesty, and time. For the first time in a long while, I was not focused on proving my importance. I was simply watching how our relationship changed naturally. I continued my life in Paris, but I stayed connected with Lily and Emily. The difference was that our conversations felt more genuine. Before, I often called because I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Now, we talked because we wanted to share our lives with each other. That small difference meant everything. I was no longer trying to hold my place in the family. I was allowing the relationship to grow on its own. At work, I continued leading the international project. The experience challenged me in ways I never expected. I had to communicate with people from different cultures, solve unfamiliar problems, and adapt quickly. But I discovered something important about myself. I was still capable of learning and growing. I was not only the husband who supported his family or the stepfather who showed up for Lily. I was Daniel Carter, a person with his own abilities and dreams. One weekend, I received a package from home. When I opened it, I found a handwritten letter from Lily. She had included some photos and a small note about things happening in her life. She wrote about school, her friends, and memories she had been thinking about. Then she wrote something that made me stop for a moment. She said she finally understood that family is not only about who someone is connected to by birth. It is also about who chooses to be there. I read that sentence several times, not because I needed confirmation, but because I realized how much Lily had grown. The little girl who once needed someone to guide her was becoming a young woman who could understand complicated emotions. I wrote back to her and told her how proud I was. I told her that I never expected perfection from her. I only wanted her to know that she was loved. Around that time, Emily and I began having deeper conversations about our marriage. We talked about things we had ignored for years. We talked about expectations, communication, and the ways we both contributed to the distance between us. I realized that I had also made mistakes. I had assumed that being dependable was enough. I had rarely told Emily when I felt hurt because I believed staying quiet was the same as being strong. But silence does not always protect relationships. Sometimes it creates space for misunderstandings to grow. Emily admitted that she had become so focused on giving Lily a connection with her biological father that she forgot to appreciate the person who had already been there every day. She said she had confused a child's need to understand her past with the idea that someone else had to become less important. Hearing that meant a lot, but I also knew we could not simply return to the way things were before. We were both different now. The experience had changed us. One evening, I walked through the streets of Paris after work and thought about how unexpected my journey had been. I left America believing I was losing my family, but instead, I had discovered a healthier way to be part of their lives. I learned that love is not measured by how much someone sacrifices until they have nothing left. Love is also about balance, respect, and allowing each person to grow. Months earlier, I had felt like I was being replaced. Now I understood something different. A person's place in a family is not created by a title. It is created through years of kindness, consistency, and memories that cannot simply disappear. I did not need to compete with anyone for a place in Lily's life. I never had to. The bond we created was built on something much stronger than a name. It was built on everything we shared. And as I continued building my new life in France, I realized that sometimes stepping away from a situation does not mean you are walking away from love. Sometimes it gives everyone the space they need to finally understand it. The months I spent in France taught me that some of the hardest journeys are not about distance. They are about learning how to see things differently. When I first arrived in Paris, I believed I was leaving because I had lost my place in my family. I thought I was walking away from a life where I was no longer needed. But slowly, I began to understand that my story was not about being replaced. It was about discovering that my worth had never depended on someone else recognizing it. It was something I carried with me all along. During that time, my relationship with Lily continued to grow in a way I never expected. Our conversations became more meaningful. We talked about her goals, her worries, and the small details of everyday life. I noticed that she was becoming more comfortable sharing her thoughts with me. She no longer spoke to me as someone who was simply part of her mother's life. She spoke to me as someone who had always been part of hers. One afternoon, Lily called me while I was walking home from work. She sounded excited because she had received an important opportunity at school. In the past, I would have immediately offered advice, trying to help her make every decision. But this time, I did something different. I listened first. I asked questions. I let her explain what she wanted and why it mattered to her. I realized that being a father figure was not only about guiding someone. It was also about respecting who they were becoming. After our conversation, I sat on a bench near a small park and thought about how much had changed. Years earlier, I believed being a good father meant always having the answers. Now I understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the confidence to find their own answers. Back home, Emily was also experiencing a change. She told me that she had started seeing our past differently. She said she had spent so much time thinking about what Lily needed from her biological father that she had forgotten to recognize what I had already given. She admitted that she had focused on a connection based on history while overlooking a connection built through years of daily commitment. I appreciated her honesty, but I also wanted her to understand something important. I never wanted to take anyone's place. I never wanted Lily to choose between people. I only wanted the love and effort I gave to be respected for what it was. A few weeks later, Emily told me that Lily had asked a question that stayed with her. Lily had asked, "Does someone have to be related to you to be your family?" Emily said she did not answer immediately because she wanted to choose the right words. She told Lily that family can be created in many ways. Some people enter our lives through birth. Others enter through choice, commitment, and love. Hearing that gave me a feeling I could not easily describe. Not because I needed someone to prove I mattered, but because I realized that the lesson had finally reached everyone. We were all learning that family is not a competition. There is room for different kinds of love. There is room for different relationships. There is room for people who show up in different ways. Near the end of my first year in France, my company offered me the opportunity to continue working internationally. It was an incredible professional achievement, something I would have been proud of at any point in my career. But now, my decision was not based only on work. I wanted to think about what kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. Before, I made decisions by asking what everyone else needed from me. Now, I asked myself what created a healthy and meaningful life for everyone involved. That change in thinking was one of the biggest lessons I learned. I could love my family deeply and still have dreams of my own. I could support the people I cared about without losing myself in the process. One evening, Emily and Lily called me together. Seeing them both on the screen reminded me of how far we had come. There was no tension, no need to explain the past again. We simply talked. We laughed. We shared stories about our days. It felt natural. It felt like a family finding a new rhythm. I knew things would never be exactly the same as before, but maybe that was not the goal. Sometimes a relationship has to change before it can become stronger. Sometimes people need distance to understand closeness. And sometimes the person who quietly steps away is not leaving a family behind. They are creating the space needed for everyone to understand how much that person truly meant. The days that followed were filled with paperwork, phone calls, and quiet conversations that changed the way I saw my own family. David stayed by my side through every step, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my son not as the busy businessman who had drifted away, but as the little boy who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. The pain of what Victoria had done was still there, but another feeling was growing stronger. Clarity. Mr. Patterson, the attorney David recommended, carefully reviewed every document we collected. The bank records, the property information, the account details. Every piece added another layer to the truth. Victoria had not made one mistake. She had created a pattern. She had taken something meant to protect me and turned it into something that benefited herself. Sitting across from Mr. Patterson in his office, I looked at the folders stacked neatly on the table. 2 years of my life were inside those papers. 2 years of wondering why my son seemed so distant. 2 years of believing my struggles were simply a part of getting older. I folded my hands together and took a slow breath. I keep thinking about all the things I could have done if I had known, I said. Mr. Patterson looked at me kindly. Mrs. Anderson, what happened was not because you failed to notice something. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who know exactly what we want to believe. His words stayed with me, because that was the hardest part. Victoria had not been a stranger. She had sat at my table. She had smiled at me during holidays. She had called me Mom. I had welcomed her into my family because I believed family meant giving people the benefit of the doubt. A week later, David and I drove to Lake Morrison for the first time. I had seen pictures of the property, but I had never stood on the land that was supposed to be mine. The road curved through tall trees before opening to a quiet view of the water. The house sat near the shoreline, beautiful and peaceful. For a moment, I simply stood there. I thought about all the mornings I had spent in my small apartment counting every dollar. I thought about the nights I worried about medical bills and whether I could afford repairs when something broke. This place represented more than money. It represented the care my son had tried to give me. It represented a future that someone else had taken away. David stood beside me, his expression heavy. Mom, I should have checked. I should have made sure everything reached you. I looked at him and shook my head gently. You trusted the person you loved. That is not a crime, David. He looked down at the ground. But I ignored the person who loved me. Those words hurt more than anything else because they were true. But I also knew something important. My son was finally seeing what had happened. Not because I demanded it. Not because I forced him to choose sides. He saw it because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. As we walked through the empty rooms of the lake house, I ran my fingers along the wooden railing overlooking the water. I imagined the mornings I could spend there. A cup of coffee in my hands. The sound of birds outside. A quiet life that belonged to me. For the first time since my husband passed away, I allowed myself to imagine a future again. I had lost 2 years because of Victoria's choices, but I would not lose the years ahead because of them. The woman who entered that house was not the same woman who had sat alone in a small apartment wondering if anyone cared. I was still the same mother, the same grandmother, the same person who had spent her life caring for others. But now, I finally understood that caring for myself mattered too.